Very happy to welcome Abi Silver back again for an author chat. You're going to start us off with an intro to yourself and your newest book.
Yes, hi everyone. Thanks so much, Caroline, for hosting me again. So tonight I'm going to be talking mostly about the Ambrosia Project, which is the latest Burton and Lamb thriller. But obviously, I'm very happy for anyone who's unfamiliar with the series to answer any questions, including about my previous books. But this is here we go, the Ambrosia Project, which has got this wonderful cover, kind of sort of Fatal Attraction vibe going on there, definitely. So the Ambrosia Project begins with the dramatic death of Brett Ingram, who's a food entrepreneur, and he happens to drop dead at a meeting, at a public event, which is actually being filmed, when he's surrounded by all kinds of people from the food industry, and they're a very interesting crowd. They include a vegan TV chef, a radio host who has a program all about food, a scientist, rather solemn lady who's researching the feeding of soldier fly larvae, so flies essentially, to livestock, and a blogger who has a blog called Meat and No Veg, which advocates a completely carnivorous living, absolutely no fruit and veg whatsoever. And lastly, a farmer who is very involved in the sustainable beef movement. So we've got all these very interesting people sitting next to Brett Ingram when he stands up to speak and suddenly collapses and dies. And the main suspect, who becomes the defendant in the trial, which is the central part of the story, is the caterer, Nick Demetriou. And he's apparently been told that Brett has a seafood allergy. And so off the back of that, and I suppose, I mean, these are contemporary stories. They're set in London. They're set now. So this story is set just as we're coming out of the COVID pandemic earlier this year. So I don't know if you know, but there was very much a kind of pushback on lots of small caterers during COVID for breaching health and safety regulations in real life. So kind of off the back of that, in my story, we discovered that there's a real desire to punish people for perhaps not being as careful as they should with the food they serve. So Nick Demetriou goes on trial, and my intrepid legal duo, Judith Burton and Constance Lamb, step in to defend him. And that's really where I'll stop in terms of my introduction. I don't know if there's anything you want to ask, Caroline, or if you've got any questions, anyone.
We will. So we've got some hellos from Mills Pixie and from Laura. They've both dropped in and said hello.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
I thought we'd start off nice and easy. Your background is in law.
My background, it is. So I am a lawyer. I have what they call nowadays this strange expression of a portfolio career, which means that, so I gave up being a full-time permanent lawyer in 2015. I was actually out of work for about a year looking for another job. I wanted to change what I was doing slightly. And that's actually when I sat down and wrote my first book, The Pinocchio Brief. And ever since then, what I've chosen to do is I work as a legal consultant. So I work for maybe 6 or 8 months of the year. And then I finish what I'm doing and have a complete break. And I work for 6 or 8 months writing. And that works for me because I find it very difficult to write unless I've got quite a long period of time. If I've only got an hour or two, it's really hard for me. I want to get very immersed in the story. So that way of doing things kind of gives me the best of both worlds, because I do find that being a writer is a very solitary profession. You know, you are locked away for hours on end. Um, and so knowing that I'm doing that for a limited period of time and then being able to go, if you like, back out into the world again and talk to people, that really helps me with my writing. And obviously, I kind of pick up things all the time when I'm in my lawyer life and my kind of going out life, which I use to fuel my writing. Um, so that's my background really, and I think it obviously helps that my central characters are lawyers. I hope it adds kind of credibility. I still have to check a few points, even myself, but generally, I know how things work in a courtroom, so that helps a lot in terms of writing the stories.
I was going to say, is that what drew you into sort of having your lawyers as and a lot of you have a lot of focus on the courtroom in your books, don't you? Like, is that a reason why you went that down that way? That just kind of it being your comfort zone?
So, comfort zone, yes. We're always told as writers, kind of write what you know. But I think it was more than that. I've always thought that a courtroom was a very exciting place. um, it's very dramatic. There's lots of real theatre going on there. So I think it lends itself very well to exciting storytelling. If you think of some of the great books that have been made into films as well, you know, there are some wonderful moments. I love To Kill a Mockingbird, and you know, the real drama of the courtroom. So I hope it's to the benefit of readers. You know, I hope that they also enjoy that. I think I think also I feel that I can give a voice to people, to characters who may not otherwise have a voice through the lawyers. So, to give you one example, in my second book, The Aladdin Trial, where a Syrian refugee goes on trial for murdering a woman, he's the hospital cleaner, and she dies in dramatic fashion. She falls from the 11th story of the hospital at the beginning of the book, and he's the main suspect. So people like Ahmed Kabani, my Syrian refugee character, don't often have a voice in society. And he has Judith and Constance to represent him, and they essentially give him a voice to tell his story as part of the story that I tell in the Aladdin trial. I mean, I think the other thing is that having lawyers, it's a little bit different. There are lots of police procedurals, private investigators out there. There aren't so many lawyers acting as kind of super sleuths. So I wanted to write something a bit different, and to have, you know, a slightly different angle on the thriller. So I think all of those things are the reasons together why I wanted to write Constance and Judith. I mean, I have to say, when I wrote the first book, The Pinocchio Brief, I didn't immediately think I would be writing a series. I just wanted to tell the story of Raymond Maynard, who's a young boy who was bullied a young man who was bullied at school and ends up being accused of murdering his teacher. So I kind of had that story I really wanted to tell, and Judith and Constance came to his rescue as his defence lawyers. And it might have, of course, have been a one-off, but then when it was well received and people liked the characters, I sat down and decided that I should write some more.
Yeah, I was trying to think of other kind of courtroom drama books over in the UK. Like, I can think of John Grisham, but I can't think of many UK based.
So there's Imran Mahmood, who writes some great, has written 3 great books. But most of the other writers who write thrillers, even if they're UK based writers, they do set them in America. So yes.
Mills has said that she works in a freeform cafe, so she's going to have to read the
Yeah.
Ambrosia Project.
Well, yes. I think you'll find lots of interesting food for thought, as I would say in the story. I mean, I do ultimately write about things that bother me and scare me. And for me, what could be more terrifying than people messing with our food? Because we all eat. I mean, maybe with some of the other stories I've told, so the Cinderella Plan, which is the third book in the series, is all about someone who has an accident in his driverless car. And obviously, you can tell that there I'm wanting people through the story to think about all the issues that surround driverless cars. But food, you know, that is something that touches every single one of us now, not at a moment in the future. So really, I was motivated to write this story by thinking about all kinds of things that are happening with food in our lives now, what we eat, what we're being told we should eat, what we might be eating not very long into the future. And that really frightened me. And what I like to do in my stories, it's the thread really running through all of them, is to examine perhaps the old or conventional way of doing things, and then a new way of doing things. And so obviously with the car scenario, we've got everyone driving their own cars versus autonomous vehicles. And in this book, without giving too much away, you know, I touch on the idea of, you know, ultra processed junk food, as they call it. So manufacturers selling us food that really isn't very good for us at all, but is still the hard sell. And it's often the food that's placed by the till. Gene modified food, the prevalence of food allergies. So there's lots of really scary stuff, I think, in the food that we eat. And it's something that I'm trying to bring out in the story.
I think it's quite an interesting premise as well, like someone potentially dying because you've like known about an allergy or, you know, messed with the food in a way like that, because it's almost like a really clever crime, like you might almost get away with it.
Well, I in the research that I've done, there are lots of crime writers who use poison in their stories. And Agatha Christie used poison a lot. She apparently was a trained pharmacist, and so she knew an awful lot about natural remedies and plants that you could use to poison people. So you may know more than me about some of her books, but poisoning is kind of a great way of killing people in crime stories, because, as you say, often it's very difficult to detect, or it can be. And even if you find out that you think someone's died as a result of being poisoned, then you've kind of got to also work out how it was administered, how they did it, and why this person is dead and other people perhaps are not. So it's really good fodder for crime writers, I think. So I was just reading. Am I allowed to read the questions on the side? Is that okay?
Yeah, no, I'm getting to the questions on the side. Donna has said hello. You will have met Donna at Capital Crime, I would imagine.
Yes, I did.
Along with Sam, who's like my other half, like my partner in crime.
Yes, yeah, it was a wonderful festival, I have to say. It was great.
It sounds amazing, but like the life of a teacher is that you can't go to things when it's a weekday.
Yes.
In term time, so I missed it, but I was very sad. I was like at work looking at all the pictures, being like. Laura said, "Can you read as a standalone, and do you have to read from the start of the series?" Is that the one that you're going to answer?
I just saw that one. Yes. So the answer is that yes, you can read as a standalone. Each book covers a different new case for Judith and Constance. So each book can be read as a standalone. The only thing I suppose I would say is that in the first book in the series, that's when Judith and Constance work together for the first time. And so obviously there is in each book you've got the story, but there's a kind of a story arc really running through the series, if you like, which is the relationship developing between Judith and Constance, the professional relationship, and how they kind of work together. And they do refer a little bit from time to time back to the previous cases they've worked on, but usually when they do, they explain what's gone on before. So, and this book actually it's interesting. I think Judith is very much, so Judith is the barrister, Constance is the solicitor, because, you know, we have this system here in the UK. Solicitors are the ones who usually meet the clients. Barristers, generally speaking, are the ones who stand up in court. And so they work together. Judith is older. In the first book in the series, she's in her early 40s. We've now moved on 5 or 6 years. She's white, she's privately educated, she's quite opinionated. She says exactly what she thinks a lot of the time. And she's the one who's very traditional. She prefers kind of pen and paper to any other way of doing things. And Constance is the complete opposite. So she's much younger. We meet her, first of all, in her mid-20s when she's a fairly new solicitor. She's black. She's educated in her local state school in Hackney. She's incredibly thorough and determined, and she's much more, as you can imagine, much more modern in her outlook and likes innovation. And so actually through my duo, what I can do in terms of the series is whichever theme I'm dealing with, whether it's food or as in the Rapunzel Act, a trial being filmed for public consumption, it's quite nice because generally speaking, Judith will hate anything new and Constance will love it. And so through those two characters, I can kind of put forward to you as the reader different viewpoints, and I hope I do it in quite a balanced way. So that's a very roundabout way of saying you don't have to read the whole series. You could even dip in, I suppose, if a particular theme interests you. But obviously, if you want to follow their relationship all the way through, then start at the beginning.
Laura's also asked you if you've acted. It's our favourite group question. Have you acted out a scene to help with the writing process?
I don't know about acting. I do talk. I walk around the house. I kind of pace around the house, speaking the characters' words in my head. So that's how I like to do things. I like to listen to them and see what they sound like. I don't know if that's acting out. So who do other people act out their scenes?
Oh boy, yes, yeah. We've had a lot of random questions. People have held like knives to their throats, put themselves in the boot of a car to see what it's like. Tied their husband up to see if they could escape a certain thing. Acted out a fight on Whitby Pier.
Now I feel very boring in comparison. I mean, I do things like complicated things about, you know, which hand you might use for things, those kind of things. But no, nothing as dramatic as that. Sorry.
Well, it's one of the reasons why it's our favourite question, because people have done some crazy things.
This one I didn't act this out myself, but going back again to the Aladdin trial, which, as I said, involves this lady, this artist falling right at the very beginning. So I almost always have to talk to a pathologist about cause of death because I try to get my science right, if you like. And I was amazed then. And so obviously this lady falls and she's found by a dog walker lying on the ground. And they come and look at how far away from the building and the position that she's lying in. And so I asked this pathologist, is there any way that you can tell from the way somebody's lying on the ground how they died, you know, whether they were pushed or whether they just fell or how they were standing before they fell? And he sent me a scientific paper from Japan where they'd got volunteers to jump off a building, albeit onto something soft below, but to either jump off a building or be thrown off a building, and then they'd kind of looked at how they fell. And all I could think was, who would have volunteered to do this? So things like that. I when I'm doing my research, I do things like that, but I tend to ask other people. I don't do them myself.
I think I've heard of that paper. I think it won an Ig Nobel Prize, which are great. Have you ever seen those?
No.
Well, the Ig Nobel Prizes are awarded every year for like the silliest science.
Okay.
So they kind of follow the same thing, and they're given at Harvard, and they give them to like people who've just done ridiculous science. So I think the British Standard for a cup of tea won the literature prize because it's like 50 pages long or something. But they're great. If you go and look at them, you'll be amazed at what some people get away with doing as like science research.
Yeah.
We've got quite a lot of comments about food. So yes. Laura says she's got a food intolerance to beef due to Campylobacter poisoning. It was scary enough biting into a vegetarian burger that tasted very realistic. But to think how she'd feel if it was an allergy.
Yeah.
Mills has had nightmares about accidentally giving someone a food they're allergic to at work. She's never done it.
Yeah, I mean, it is a real problem now, and I never realised. I mean, I don't have anyone in my family who has a food allergy, but some of my boys' friends do. None of them very serious, but I kind of always dismissed it as not that important until I had a boy over who had a nut allergy, and who basically said he couldn't really even be in the house if we had nuts in the house. So I started then to understand for the first time how serious it can be. And obviously the numbers of allergies, the rates of food allergies are going up and up. Yeah, so I'm very sympathetic, yes.
Greg's apparently really strict about allergens. And Mills said that the notifiable ones are easy, or at least should be, but she has an orange allergy if it's not another.
Yes. Which I've never heard of. Gosh. Okay.
No, I've never heard of it either. See, all these things are fascinating, aren't they? Once you start going into it, you've opened up a can of worms with the...
Oh, gosh. Orange juice.
Oh, wow. Poor Mills. Orange juice has hospitalised her. That's not good, is it? No. So, do you have a plan for the Burton and Lamb series? Do you have a sort of an idea of where you're going to finish it off? Or are you just going to write an endless series? You kind of think it's firing, or...
So I'm sure it won't be endless. Everything has to end somewhere. I have already handed in the first draft of the next one, though. So there is going to be at least one more, and probably at least another one after that.
I don't mean like endless, but some authors sort of start a series knowing that they want to write, 3 books. I think Ellie Griffith said that there was going to be like so many books, and now she's got to that point. It's like, well, it's ending here because that's where it always was going to end. And then some people sort of start a series and don't have an end. Yeah. I just wondered if you'd started with a, this is where you envisage them kind of hanging up there.
No, not yet. I mean, as I said, when I started, I never really envisaged the series. Now I'm just really enjoying writing the series, and I feel like they've got plenty of distance to run yet. I mean, in this book, we're only just... So I am giving them a bit of a love interest, both of them, after 5 books. So Constance has finally... She had a fleeting romance in the Aladdin trial with a not too much fun actor who she kicked out. And that's obviously 4 years ago. So she's now got a man in her life again, and seems to be quite reasonably happy about it. But I won't give too much away because there are a few twists there as well. So I feel like they've got quite a way to go. The real difficulty for me is that obviously, as I say, they cover a topical theme. Each book covers a topical theme. So in the Midas game, which is the book that immediately preceded this one, we had a celebrity gamer accused of murdering a doctor, a psychiatrist, who treated patients addicted to online gaming. And that was really fueled by me becoming very interested in the whole online gaming phenomenon, and the fact that so many children of kind of teenage age, perhaps even younger, were probably playing for more hours than was healthy. So there was that theme. The new book, I won't say too much about, that I've only just sent in the first draft for, but that covers another theme. I think the problem is that every time I come across something that piques my interest, I just think, oh, that would make a really good birds in a lab story. And I've actually got an idea for number 8.
I'm just going to plug my computer in.
Yeah, go on. The one that will come after that. So no, I'm not planning the end yet. And obviously, as long as people are still enjoying the books and want to read them, certainly for the moment, I'll keep going. So I think that there will be at least 8, and then we'll see.
Well, that sounds good. So you've talked about the things that pique your interest. Where do you get all of your ideas from?
So, we were talking a little bit just before the live stream started. A lot of it is just from contemporary sources. So the newspapers. I read New Scientist, which is the most wonderful publication. It tells you about all kinds of things going on all over the world. And then those are kind of my sources. News, the newspaper, Sunday newspapers, kind of reading the little stories at the bottom that perhaps are not so well known, online news. And usually what happens is it won't be just one idea that will lead to a story. There'll be one thing I'm interested in that I'll kind of squirrel away, and then something else, perhaps completely different. And then I'll kind of suddenly think, oh, those two ideas would work quite well together. And at that point, I sit down and think about how to write the story. But yes, it's very much current affairs, news, stories that other people tell me. So in fact, the scientist who's interested in feeding livestock on soldier fly larvae, that was my husband, kind of read that, and that was our conversation over the dinner table. But it was all about whether, would you really want to eat food that has been fed on larvae? And the issue is that these flies are sometimes fed on human waste. So would you actually, it's a great way of getting rid of human waste in a kind of environmentally safe way, but to also use it as a food source. But would you actually really want to eat this, even if you're 2 levels removed in the food chain? So that was just as I say, a kind of, oh, have you heard about this? It's really interesting conversation over dinner. Yes.
So once you pick something, so say like the gaming addiction one, I think that's really interesting. Once you pick like that as your topic, how do you then go about your research?
Yes, very, very good question. I pretty much always, if I need to, and that's a good example, seek out people who have expertise, because there is only so much you can do in terms of online research. So I actually took to social media to ask for help from anyone who was a gaming designer, so that I could find out a bit of that side of how online games are designed, and to what extent they might be specifically designed to keep people playing. So that was very useful. Although actually, if you search, there is quite a lot of material on the internet. But I talked to a game designer, and on the other side, I was lucky enough to get involved with so there is a whole international organisation of doctors, therapists, teachers, psychologists who are all looking at what they call problematic use of the internet. So they are doing research, they've got funding from international bodies to look at exactly how too much use of the internet impacts us, whether it's gaming or gambling or shopping or too much use of social media. And so they allowed me to view quite a lot of their research papers, although a lot of it's public anyway, and invited me to one of their public meetings, which had to be online because of COVID. But it was really, really interesting. So I do try very much to talk to real specialists. As I say, usually somebody dies in my books. So again, I like to talk to a pathologist to make sure that that things stack up. This time around in the Ambrosia Project, I had some very, very interesting conversations with a pathologist about poisoning and food poisoning and anaphylactic shock and all those kind of things. And it's always funny because I was then sent a real life case about someone who died in prison, and they decided that he had committed suicide by eating peaches and peach stones, which apparently have arsenic in them. And it was just so unbelievable. I thought, well, if I actually had put that in one of my books, everybody would have said, what complete nonsense. But this was a real life case. So again, I think that specialists, particularly the forensics pathologists I've spoken to, they're really wonderful, and they give their time free, and they come up with some really great ideas about how to kill your victims and how to do it without being found out.
I was at a talk at Harrogate that had like pathologists, like it was an experts panel, and there was one there who'd done some work on Agatha Christie, and she said that she's written a book in which people were poisoned with thallium, and it actually saved people because people had read the book, and she was so accurate in her descriptions of it that the person who then went to treat the people who were actually poisoned with it knew what it was because of the Agatha Christie book.
Wow.
So it's weird, isn't it, that, you know, we think it's just fiction. It's not going to do anything, but actually,
yes,
it's like a nice story where fiction's kind of helped.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I think most fiction writers do research. You know, they do make sure that the way they suggest someone dies will actually work in real life, whether it's having a fight on Whitby Pier or whatever. You know, we try very hard because the last thing we want is for readers to say, oh, you know, that would never happen.
So across those, like all the books that you've written, is there like a kind of a most interesting sort of research rabbit hole you've been down?
Oh gosh, I don't. Probably. Well, actually, the food. Well, I'll keep changing my mind. The food stuff is fascinating, and I had to stop actually because there were so many other things I could have talked about, but I already cover quite a few different areas of dangerous food. The driverless cars, that was really fascinating for me. So the Cinderella plan. And so it begins with James Salisbury, who happens to be the head of a company which manufactures driverless cars. And his company is on the cusp of being able to sell those cars to the public. And interestingly, the book, I probably wrote it in, I don't know, 2018, 2019, something like that, when everybody was saying that we were going to have driverless cars on our streets almost immediately. And obviously, fast forward a few years and it hasn't happened yet. But so he has an accident in his driverless car, and the issue, which, and it's sadly a fatal accident, and he's brought to court for causing death by dangerous driving. But the issue is, was he in control when the accident happened, or was the car, was it in autonomous mode? Was the car in control? And for him, it's a real dilemma, because if he was in control, he may go to prison for causing the death of this family. But if the car was in control, then his whole business that he's been working on to launch, his driverless car business may completely fold, because nobody will trust his cars anymore if the car actually caused the accident. And again, I looked at so many different problems, if I can put it that way, with driverless cars, reasons why they might not be safe. Like the possibility of from real life events, because you probably know there have been some awful, tragic, one-off deaths associated with driverless cars. There was a man in America who drove underneath a trailer, which he just couldn't see, in his driverless car. Another one who hit a barrier, and there was a poor lady cyclist who was killed as somebody emerged from a tunnel when it was just getting dark. So there's loads and loads of issues about how those cars work, how the software works, privacy issues. Would you really want to get into a car? Because driverless cars are networked. The whole idea of how they work is that they talk to all the cars around them. And so would you really want to get into a driverless car that was sending a message to other people about who you were and where you were going? So all kinds of interesting stuff. They can be hacked, maybe. And there's some there's other books that have been written about, driverless cars being hacked. John Mars has written a wonderful book about people in driverless cars that are kind of all being sent on a collision course. Anyway, I won't give too much away. But so again, these are all things that terrify me. And usually the more research I do, the more frightening I find them. And I actually have to pull back a bit and try to be balanced when I'm telling the story, because actually what I really want to say is, don't get into a driverless car, or don't eat a particular kind of food.
Yeah, I was gonna say, have you ever put yourself off something completely from your research? Have you ever gone so far into it that you've been like, no, I can't ever, I'd never own a driverless car?
Well, that definitely, but I think probably so. I'm probably a bit of a control freak, which I think maybe quite a few writers are. What's quite nice about writing is that you can control what your characters do. So you might not be able to control things in real life, but you can control your characters. So I don't really like to even be a passenger in a car all that much, especially not if kind of my kids are driving. So I prefer to be the driver. So there was that to start with. But no, it's definitely put me off completely. The other things, so the Rapunzel Act, which is my fourth book, is all about a trial being filmed. And obviously it has much more than a nod to the O.J. Simpson trial in the States. And since I wrote it, we've obviously had the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp trial. So another high profile trial, where all the testimony was filmed. And really, I suppose the core message of my book is that if you film trials, it can turn the whole event into a bit of a media circus. And it can mean that a victim, a witness, the lawyers, even people in the jury can suddenly find themselves under tremendous pressure because they're in the public eye. So that's a difficult one for me, because with my lawyer hat on, I can see that in theory, filming trials is a wonderful thing to do, because justice should be transparent. Is there anything wrong with allowing the public to see what goes on in a case, because they want to see justice being done. And there are quite a lot of really high profile lawyers who think that would be a really good idea. But when I was writing the story and trying to think about all the really bad things that might happen, it definitely put me off. So I suppose that's shows a bit of a tussle between the kind of lawyery side of me saying, well, in theory, this should be fine. But when I actually started to write the story, albeit thinking about other real life events, I could see so many reasons why it might just not be fair.
I think, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? The O.J. Simpson trial, when I watched that, got me really interested in DNA. Well, it's one of the things that got me really interested in DNA. So it can be a good thing. It inspired me into going to uni a little bit.
Yes. Yes, I think that's the idea, isn't it? That it will educate people, it will explain to people how the process works, it will show them that it's fair. It's just that I think it's human nature, isn't it? We're inquisitive, which is great, but it's so difficult not to judge people when they're there in front of you. And I think also when people are in court, they are under tremendous pressure. Not just witnesses, everybody in the courtroom, even without the cameras. It's a really, really stressful thing to have to go and give evidence. So if you imagine that, and then on top of that, cameras, and then on top of that, knowing that thousands, millions of people are watching, and then on top of that, perhaps, as in my story, there being a dedicated TV channel where they're going over at the end of the day everything that you've said and done and been wearing and the way you've kind of looked at the camera. And as they did with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, going over and over their testimony and trying to read things into it. So people don't always perform at their best in court. And that's something I like to try and bring out in my books, because obviously we have Judith often when she's in the courtroom and she's about to cross-examine a witness, thinking about how she wants the witness to give their evidence, what she wants the witness to say, and how best to get it from them. But of course, it doesn't always work like that. People don't always perform, if you like, to their best when they're under pressure.
No, and I'd imagine they could come out with some quite interesting things when they're feeling sort of stressed, and they're not necessarily going to answer things in the way that they've even been coached to. Or
well, in this country, you're actually not allowed to coach witnesses at all. In America, the rules are different, but here you can obviously ask your client what happened and to tell you what happened, but you're not allowed to kind of do practice runs with them. So you never quite know what they're going to say. It's always a bit of a lottery, and it's a real issue with a defendant, with the person who's accused, whether you actually allow them to give evidence or not. Because you're never quite sure, even if you believe they're innocent, how they're going to come over.
So this is like one of the interesting things that you wouldn't necessarily think about, isn't it? Or like one of those differences, because everyone sort of has a idea of like courts and witnesses, and a lot of it probably comes from fiction. And
yes. And I think that again we have this, when you say you're going to give your evidence in court, you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And I think that's quite interesting, that there's this kind of 3 levels of truth. You're telling the truth, but that's not enough. Is it the whole truth? Is it nothing but the truth? Because of course, what you get in a courtroom is you only get a very small part of the story. You get what the lawyers want you to hear. you get the witnesses that they put forward, and you get a very limited part of the story that they allow the witnesses to tell. So, I mean, I used to watch something called Crown Court. I can't remember if I talked about this last time. When I was growing up, I watched a program called Crown Court, which was a Granada TV show on in, I suppose, the 70s and 80s. And all the action was in the courtroom. So you didn't see anything else except for what was in the courtroom, which is why it was so clever, because you could get ideas of what had actually happened, the crime that had taken place, but only through the courtroom setting. And that's incredibly difficult because, as I say, you don't get the whole story. So what I try to do in my books is I have a kind of before bit where Judith and Constance are interviewing the witnesses and getting a bit more of the backstory, and then you have your court scenes, and then at the end you might have a little bit of extra. So sometimes by the end of the trial we do know exactly what's happened, but sometimes, because, as I say, you don't get the whole story, so whether somebody is found innocent or found guilty, that doesn't necessarily answer the question for you of what really happened. So sometimes I have to have a little bit of an add-on at the end, to a sort of a debrief where we get a bit more information about actually what happened. Oh, you've gone. Oh, Caroline, you've disappeared. No. Is everyone else still there? No. Yes, you're still here. Okay, so somebody ask me a question, please, and I'll keep going. No questions? Read the blurb from a book. Okay. All right. And I have thought of something else I can tell you about, actually. What did I think about what I could tell you about? Oh, yes. Well, I'll read you the blurb from this book, and then I'll tell you about what I was going to say. So it says, a tragic accident, or is there a poisoner on the loose? When food magnate Brett Ingram collapses and dies at a public event, his seafood allergy is blamed, and the caterer, Nick Demetriou, charged with manslaughter. Nick hires legal duo Judith Burton and Constance Lamb to defend him. They scrutinise the colourful panellists at the event, a food blogger, a beef farmer, a food scientist, a TV chef, and a radio host, who all seem to be holding something back. There's something fishy about the allergy story. Did one of the speakers have a hand in the businessman's death? And what of the nasty incidents that keep befalling them? Should the net be cast wider to include opponents of Brett's mysterious Ambrosia initiative? So that's the blurb on this book. Now, the other thing I was going to talk about, if it's interesting, is the whole series versus standalone actual point. And as I said, I never thought I'd write a series necessarily, but are my books cozy? Let me just note that down, and I'll come back to you. But the advantage, of course, of writing a series is you get more time with the characters. So, as I mentioned, you can kind of have the development, that story arc, the development of the relationship between Constance and Judith. You can bring characters back. If readers like a character, you can give them a bigger part next time around. So I do enjoy, if you like, the luxury of writing a series and being able to spend more time with the characters. But you obviously have to try to make sure there's enough in each book for it to be interesting. And I suppose the other difficult things are you've got to try and link the series. So whether it's with the covers, with the titles of the books. And obviously I began with Pinocchio in the title of my first book, The Pinocchio Brief, and then I had the Aladdin trial. And so people often said to me, are these Disney stories? And of course, now you can see that we've moved slightly away from what could have been Disney, because we've got the Ambrosia project and the Midas game. So you have to be able to link your stories through the titles and the themes. And that kind of means you should plan a bit at the beginning, so if you want to do a series, you know you can do that. So what I suppose I say now, in terms of the way that I link the names of the stories, is that there's always something in the name which relates to a traditional story that we may all know about, but obviously my book will put some kind of fresh spin on it. So I won't say too much about Ambrosia because I don't want to give it away, but it's not about rice pudding or creamed rice. It's about the kind of mythical Ambrosia. So are my books cozy? Depends what you mean. They're not gruesome. There's usually only one death and not too much blood, only a sort of as much blood as you need to make the story work. They're much more about the characters and the themes and the drama of the courtroom. In terms of setting, they're set usually in a fictional Hackney police station, and Constance lives in Hackney, Judith lives in Hampstead, so it's quite nice. We've got that contrast of areas of London, but a lot of the action is in the courtroom. It's usually in the Old Bailey, which is in central London, wonderful old criminal courtroom buildings. Cozy, I suppose, I think of a little bit as crime fiction set in sort of villages with village fates, and they can have murders, can't they? But they're perhaps not taken so seriously. So I wouldn't class my stories as cozy, but equally they're not gruesome, and they're not psychological twisty thrillers. They're much more legal thrillers, whodunits, following sort of Sherlock Holmesy, following a series of clues to try and find out who done it or how they did it. Any other questions? Donna, thank you. Am I a visual writer? Do I see the images? Yes, I do. I see the images in my head all the time. As I say, I walk around the house kind of saying the words. I do a lot of my best thinking in the early hours of the morning. Thank you. I've just seen a comment about finish off by showing us my books. So yeah, I often do my best thinking in the early hours of the morning when the house is quiet, and I haven't got to make anyone any meals or take anyone anywhere. Hang on, so here we go. So here's the whole series with their wonderful new covers. So we have the Pinocchio Brief, which is the first one, which is all about a murder in a school and lie detecting software, nicknamed Pinocchio. The second book in the series is the Aladdin Trial. There we go. That's the hospital setting. That's the poor lady who falls dramatically from her hospital floor, 11th story. The Cinderella Plan, which is actually, it does begin, the first chapter, I'm sorry, is a little bit gruesome, but kind of necessary. That's the one about the driverless cars. The Rapunzel Act, which is our former celebrity footballer on trial for murdering his former wife, and the trial is filmed for public consumption. The Midas Game, here we go. Celebrity gamer accused of murdering the psychiatrist who helps people with addiction to online gaming. And here we go, the Ambrosia Project with a nice big cooking pot, which I've been talking about mostly. And the next book, so I can tell you a little bit about the next one. It's going to be all about a politician who is caught with a Class A drug in his pocket on a night out, and accused not only of possessing the drug, but of perhaps thinking about administering it to the young intern who he's having a drink with. So, but I won't say too much about the other issues that come up in the book, but that's how it begins. And thank you, great covers. Yes, so a lady called Nell Wood did my covers, and I think they're really fantastic. And I have told her, but she's quite shy. So if you find her online, do tell her how wonderful you think they are. Lovely. So any more questions? Caroline, are you the one saying, oh, I can't see who you are. I saw I've lost internet. No, I can't find Caroline. Anything else, anyone? We're almost at the end of our hour. Can I help you with anything else? Otherwise, it's tomorrow is my launch date, so I'm very excited. And actually, if any of you are based in London and you're around Waterstones, Leadenhall Market, so nearest Underground, Bank or Liverpool Street, 6:30 tomorrow, I'll be having my launch. You're very welcome to come along. Oh, okay. To finish, hit the X. Okay, everybody. So thank you very much. Thanks for all your questions. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the session. And thank you, Caroline. And sorry we've lost you. Bye, everyone.